You want to go first, Bart? Or you?
I'll take the first shot then.
Okay.
I think it was at church in Naples, and you were volunteering there, and I was volunteering there, and during the day we were both retired.
Yeah, yeah. As I recall, one of the first times we met, it was working on woodworking.
Yes.
We were actually building an arch going out to the meditation trail, as I recall.
Oh yeah, I remember that now. I asked you to scroll cut some fancy ends on the pergola we were building out there to go into
that was one of the first times.
Yeah, but I always thought there was another time before that when I asked you about building a bench.
Oh, I can't remember which was first, but that was definitely one of the times.
Yeah, okay. I think the bench was first, but I could be wrong on that too.
Yeah.
It's been a few years now.
Yeah, I remember the bench story well because it was back to the meditation trail again.
Right.
And I was walking in one direction and you were coming with Dave Karg in the opposite direction. We passed one another and you stopped and said, "Hey, Bill, I got a question for you. Can you help us out on making a few meditation benches?"
Yes.
And you showed me what you had and what you had for material. You told me it was the timbers for the founder's house, and you didn't want to throw them away. You wanted them to be made into something nice. And I said, I'd be happy to do it. I don't know what it's going to come out to be, but I have to be able to use my own creative thoughts to make it.
I remember that because I showed you a bench that I made, which looked like something out of the junkyard.
Well, it was more like a bus stop
compared
bench.
to what you, more like a bus stop bench.
Yeah.
Compared to what you came up with.
Yeah, I wanted to make something unique, and it came out. It was fun.
I sure had no problem with you doing it in your own style because that ended up being the best way.
Yeah. Wow.
Well, woodworking with me, how I got interested in woodworking is that I was in the business of selling lumber and building materials, so I always was around wood. But then, you know, when you're a kid and you want to drive a fire truck or a bulldozer or something like that for your job when you grow up, I came up with the idea that I wanted to turn a lathe.
Yeah.
And I'd never had a chance to do it in high school. I've had so many people tell me how, I turned a lathe back when I was in high school. Well, I don't know, for some reason I never got that opportunity.
Yeah.
And so when I first started turning on the lathe, it was like I had the controls of the bulldozer.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, for me, I did have that class in junior high, I think it was.
Yeah, junior high.
It's kind of funny. I had totally forgotten about that. I remember now making a lamp, a base of a lamp that was striped, alternating striped pieces of wood that were made out of old school desks. Oh. Some of it was cherry, some of it was oak, whatever it was. But for me, I did that one project, and then until I actually knew you for a while and saw all the fun you were having turning, I didn't turn a single thing. I mean, I did lots of woodwork. You know, I built furniture. I worked on my boat for years. I redid houses, I made cabinets, did all kinds of things, but I didn't do anything round.
Right.
But then when I saw all the fun you were having with the lathe, all of a sudden my mind started working in the round, and I wanted to make round things.
Oh, yeah. So that jogs my memory that I remember you were up at visiting us here at Shell Point, and I showed you some things, and then we went to the wood shop. And then I remember you going, I've got an idea of design in my head, but I don't have a lathe. If I put something together and glue it up, would you turn it for me?
Yeah.
And that's when we kind of really
right.
got you looking at it.
That was his first
this piece
piece
right here.
And the funny thing about that was what I had in my head and the way I was going to make it. At the time, I didn't know there was such a thing as called segmented turning. I had no idea. Mm-hmm. I thought more in terms of a dartboard. And I was going to put pegs in holes and cut pieces with spacing between it. And I didn't really know how it was going to go, but I tried to do it, and it didn't work. So then I went to the University of YouTube, and I saw, oh my word, there's something called segmented turning.
Yeah.
This looks like really fun, and that's when I came to you and said, if I do the layup work, will you turn it for me? Because I wanted to make a gift for my wife. And you said, absolutely, that'll be fun. We'll both do it together.
Yeah,
So that was
yeah, we
that was
did.
my first round thing.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, since turning this for you, and then seeing your other pieces, you've been working a lot with the segmented pieces. I've been reading many articles myself about segmenting, and I've gone to a couple of workshops on segmented, putting it
Yeah,
together.
yeah.
For some reason, though, my mind has not gotten a hold of how you see some of the vision there
Yeah.
of putting those pieces together, but I'm working on it.
Yeah, well, it's a trick. It's just a trick. But back to this, then the next step was, Bart, after we did this first project, I saw that you belonged to this Wood Turners Club.
Ah, yes.
And I
Wood Turners of Southwest Florida.
Wood Turners of Southwest Florida, here in Fort Myers, and I live in Naples. So I came up and visited a couple of times, and I said, oh, this is really a gem to learn all kinds of new things. And that was about 2 or 3 years ago. And of course, then I got my own lathe
Yes.
and started turning my own things, making round things. But it's been a great trip. It
Yes,
really has.
I remember, well, we still meet for dinner before we go to the meeting,
We do.
and then we go and enjoy the meeting, and we have demonstrations there to learn new tricks
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah, it's
And that's,
fabulous.
that's the greatest thing, sharing some information with about 20 other people in
Yeah.
there that are all turning.
Yeah, it's great. I've learned so much in those meetings.
Yes. The way that I got into the woodworking, my woodworking journey, was that I wanted to start turning. I'd been at Shell Point for a year and a half, and the supervisor of the Shell Point wood shop offered a class. It was in the weekly bulletin, weekly reminder, get crafty in the wood shop. $10 for this class, and I hot-footed it right over there and signed up for it, and we made a little Christmas ornament. And then I enjoyed that so much, I went back to the man and said, hey, you got a piece of wood I could turn? I'd like to keep turning. And so he gave me this huge chunk of wood that everybody else, he said, had been afraid of. And so I
But
started.
you didn't know enough to be afraid
I didn't know
of.
enough to be afraid of it. And so I turned it into a giant bowl, and from there I was hooked.
Yeah.
I was hooked. So then probably a couple years later, I turned enough bowls that I was looking for something new and adventurous. And at that time, there was a wood turning magazine that came to the shop every month. And I was looking through it, and I see an article by a guy named Keith Lackner, and he lived in Illinois, and he had wrote a whole big article on the how-tos of doing the resin-infused firewood logs, he called them. And so, and he was going to have a second edition, a second article, and so a couple months later, I had that one, and I read through those articles like 50 times. And I had plenty of wood around. I've been very fortunate to get natural wood, and a lot of it has knot holes in it. And that's just a perfect thing for using is to have something with a big hole in it so you can fill it with resin.
Right. Yeah. It looks like a mistake, but it ends up being
It
the
ends
feature.
up being the best.
Yeah.
It does.
My journey through the woodworking has been kind of intermittent because I used to live in Maine, and I was always doing work on my boat and work around the house, and reasonably standard type things like building the dock and fences and the most complicated thing maybe a table or something like that. But then when I moved to Florida about 30 years ago, I lived in a condo, and I had a 5x8 storage unit and a small workbox. And so for quite a few years, for probably 10 years or so, I didn't do any woodwork. But I always had the itch to get back to it. And I did a couple of small carving pieces, like a small jewelry box or that type of thing. But then about, I guess it's about 20 years ago now, I moved to a single family home, and now I had a garage and I could work in the garage. So I worked on the wood for quite a while, and then my wife was not real happy about the dust. As you know, there's lots of dust.
Lots of dust.
And so I went away from the woodworking for a couple of years, and I took drawing classes at the University of YouTube, and painting and sculpting and glass blowing, and I kept being drawn back to the wood. But I did do a major piece in twisted wire, and I really love that. But I still wanted to get back to the wood, so I convinced my wife that if I made a dust collection system, which even the best dust collection system doesn't collect it all, but I made a dust collection system and got back to the woodworking. And it wasn't very long before. Well, it was inspired by you. I remember taking down the magnolia tree during COVID.
Right.
And it was just this big 300-pound root ball. And I said, I'm going to make something out of this. All I had was a chainsaw and a grinder. So, but I made a bowl out of it.
Right.
We still have the bowl
Yep.
today. And then once I started doing that, I just wanted to make things round like you were making.
Yeah. In fact, I remember that your magnolia tree that you made that from, and so you gave me the first log above the root ball.
I did.
And I still have that bowl, and it will be in our exhibition at the Trivia Arts Center.
Awesome. Yeah. I remember that tree well.
Mm-hmm.
It about wore
There's
me out.
nothing like the feel of wood.
Yeah. Well, the first object that I'd like to explain is actually the first round object that we made.
We did.
And it was an anniversary gift. The inspiration was the Greek key. We had some pillows on our couch that had the Greek key design on it, and I wanted to make something that we could display in the living room, hopefully, if it came out good enough. So I copied that Greek key design, and I think this had about 300 pieces in it.
Oh, I thought you had 400.
It may have.
At one time, it seems like that's the number stuck in my head when we were talking about it.
It may be 400. I know the most challenging part was definitely the featuring here. But then I remember taking up to Shell Point. We spent 2 days turning this,
Yes.
and when it was just about done, do you remember it came flying off the lathe?
I know it did.
I
Scared
caught it with my foot.
I about had the big one there. Ooh.
And then it came home and actually hand carved the top. I didn't have a lathe, as I said, so I used an electric drill and turned that with an electric drill and shaped it up. So that's the first piece that I'd like to explain. The second piece that I brought to show is kind of a joke piece. It's again, it has quite a few pieces of wood in it. I think it has about 20 some odd layers, and they're alternating layers of sycamore and walnut. And the walnut, it didn't come from the same tree as this one. But I had in my mind something that I could see, and I tried to figure out how I could make it. It was basically round. So I said, well, I should be able to, combination of turning and carving, I should be able to make this. And at first I thought it was going to be what is called a Mobius strip, a variation of a Mobius strip, or I thought it was going to be a triple Mobius strip. And a Mobius strip is when you take a piece of paper and twist it and attach the ends together. It kind of looks like an infinity loop, but it's one continuous surface. And this is one continuous surface, but it turns out it's not truly a Mobius strip. I call it a Mobius pinwheel, and I intentionally misspell it because it's not a true Mobius strip. But this was at first a chunk of pancakes laid flat and then turned round and then turned into a torus. And then I drew this design on the torus, which was one continuous line. And then from the continuous line, extended it into curved planes that all connect. And it was really a really fun project. And each time I try to challenge myself to use what I've learned in the previous project to make something more challenging and hopefully beautiful as well. And I actually just in the last few days this is about a year and a half old, but I just had an inspiration to make a piece that starts out the same way of turning, drawing, carving, and I don't know if I can make it. And the last piece that I brought to show you is another piece from about, this is actually 2024 as well, no, 2023, I'm sorry. And this is sycamore as well. This started out as a log, about 10 inches in diameter, had the bark on it. I actually cut down the tree up in North Carolina, brought it home. The process was, to look at it, it looks really complicated, and the process is actually just a whole bunch of simple steps. But first cut the log in half, then turned each half on a lathe, all in the same day because I had to have the moisture contents the same.
Oh, yeah.
One couldn't be a little dry and the other a little wet.
Yep. Keep
So-
the shrinkage the same.
Keep the shrinkage the same. So I turned the two halves, the actual seam is on the equator, hollowed out both halves, and glued it back together, all in the same day. I think that was about an 8-hour day. Then once that was glued together and had dried for a few days, I started on the process of drawing on it and traced a map of the world. I should say the purpose of this was, again, as a gift to kind of commemorate the trips that my wife and I had taken over the years, and to mark with little stones the various places that we visited together, and as a gift for one of our anniversaries. So I drew all the lines on, drew the continents on, and proceeded to use a router to remove about half, wherever the ocean is. I routed that. I made a setup to be able to remove, this was about 1/4 of an inch thick originally. The oceans are about 1/8 of an inch thick, and the land is about still 1/4 of an inch thick. Then it came out so good, I thought, well, I'll put some mountains and put all the major rivers on it, and then added the places of our trips and mounted it on a burl block, and sits as a constant reminder of how much fun we've had together.
So classic Bart Sharp is at the wood shop at Shell Point is I do a lot of these resin firewood logs, I call them, and I call them firewood logs because usually the wood is not something that you could cut a board out of to make furniture or any other process. And so like in it, there are so many hairline cracks and everything already in the wood, and also this some rotten spots and knots and things like that, and a hole in there that you couldn't make sawn lumber out of it. So, but by placing that in the perfect form, which is a nice plastic 5-gallon bucket, and to get that all arranged in there, And I have to figure out a way of how I'm going to anchor it in because it likes to float in resin.
Wood does float.
And I either put some screws through the bucket or I put some steel plates on top of it, fill it up then with the resin. And originally it was all one color, but then I've gotten a little trickier at it and come up with ways to add glitter and to get a couple different colors. In this case here, I made 2 different pours. I used half of the quantity I needed in blue and then half the quantity in yellow. And so I think it came out as a pretty nice piece. It's interesting that you think you're putting in pretty much solid pieces to conserve on the resin because the resin costs the most money. But when you turn it, it's amazing how you end up with the voids that give it all the look. And I like the way the light shines through it too.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And the next piece I have is a resin piece. And this piece, I had some maple left over from this piece. And so, and you can, right here is see the hole there, the big knot hole in the rotten spot there?
Perfect, yeah.
So that's the perfect bottom when you can start out with a nice big knot hole either in the bottom or the side. And so I placed this wood in there. I actually had some, just like a common 2x4 spruce or something that I put in there to fill it up. And so I poured that in a small container. And I used a hollowing tool for this. And that's another step in my process in the wood turning. It was to go to hollow forms. Originally, I had a hole of about 1 inch in the top. And I had a different kind of wood up here in the top that I was filling that inside with. And later in the process, it jumped off the lathe, just like your piece jumped off the lathe, went bouncing across the floor and broke the hole out bigger. Yeah. So that's why we have about 2.5 inches of hole here instead of this. So to redesign and get this piece back in shape, I came up with a lid. And so in the original piece, before I mounted it on the lathe, I took it over to the bandsaw and sliced off a piece of it. And that was what gave me the product to turn this little lid for it to
just like you planned to make
just like I planned it, right? Just like I planned it.
Yeah.
Perfect piece. And then in basic wood, so during Hurricane Ian, we're sitting in a shelter, and the woman across from me said, "Bart, right today, I want to order a bowl from wood that's knocked down, a tree knocked down by the storm."
There should be plenty of that.
And as it turned out, there was a whole bunch of it. And so this is one of my Ian bowls. This is, I've made about 3 of them. I've given her bowl. I made this one, and I've still kept it for a while myself. So trees were down everywhere, and Shell Point is very quick to clean up after the storm. So I get out of the shelter, I go home, and there's 2 big mahogany trees right there at the north side of the gate into the woodlands. And they're flat down, and a forklift has already come by and moved them off the road. And so they're laying on this beside the sidewalk. And I run home, borrow a golf cart, run back to the wood shop, get my chainsaw, get down there, boom, 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 cut up some pieces. And so this mahogany is a beautiful piece of wood. You can see the colors in it.
Multiple,
and it was a crotch. Yeah, it was a crotch where the tree grows up and then splits into 2 limbs.
That's
and
beautiful.
you can see here's the main tree, and then here's the 2 limbs.
Yep.
And it makes a beautiful looking bowl, and it has knots in it, little limb knots, and knots in the bottom here. The color gets better as it ages.
Yeah, that's with mahogany.
Yes.
have to
For
repeat.
me, a future thing is to do some of what you're doing with the segmenting.
I'm
I
surprised.
have been watching YouTubes, and I have been reading the Wood Turning magazine articles.
Yeah,
And I've been reading about how to make a jig for making the pieces for the segmented turning.
yeah.
And so I'm
You'll love
gonna, instead of, I'm gonna keep doing my resin logs, but I'm gonna make a segmented log
Yeah,
and work on that.
yeah, that'll be great.
And then one other thing that is featured in my turning, there's an article in the AAW magazine, a guy named Ruben Vandersheer he is Dutch, and he came up with a whole idea of design. He makes all these circles, and he's doing them that are like 36 inches down to little ones.
These are wall-mounted things?
These are wall
I've
mounted.
seen that, yeah.
And so I have part of my display will be 8 of these, which I don't have that big of wood, and I have that big of wood.
Yeah.
And so I've made 8 of them. Every one is different colors. Some have the hole off center. Some are like a donut with a hole in the center.
Yeah.
And I'm going to pursue that some more. And he has another piece that he has in his display, in his article in the AEW magazine, is called a dent.
Huh.
And I'm going to make some dents, I think, for a future project.
Yeah. Well, my list, the problem I have is that my list is longer than my available time on this planet.
Mine too.
I have these periods where I just get idea after idea after idea, and they come so fast that I make notes in my computer and go back to them, because if I don't, I'll forget what the idea was. But I kind of see the finished product and then just have to go back and figure out how to make it.
Yes.
And right now, I know I mentioned this to you the other day, that I love the wood turning, but it is so constricting because it is perfectly round. But the wood turning is an extremely efficient way to remove a lot of wood.
Yes.
And so to me, I find myself wanting to go more and more to the carving side. Like these pieces were
Yes.
more carving than turning, more
Yes.
carving than turning.
Yes.
And in fact, I'm working on a piece right now that's more carving than turning. And I want to make some pieces. I don't know if I can do it or not, but the challenge will be to see if I can make a piece out of a solid piece of wood that you just look at, but it'd be turned and carved. But you'll finally want to ask the question, how do you do that?
Yeah.
You know, I really want to challenge myself to, the one I'm doing right now, I'm not sure I can do. I'm going to be carving from the outside and the inside at the same time.
Interesting.
And we'll see how that works. I don't
Yes.
know if it's possible. I think it is.
Yeah, I can't wait to see that one.
Yeah. Well, it may end up being scrap for one of your. Yeah.
I'll put it in a 5-gallon bucket. Make
Make
sure
some-
it'll fit in a 5-gallon bucket.
Oh, it will. Don't worry about that. I have a small lathe, remember?
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah. That'll be our next phase.
Yeah, okay.